Hello and welcome to this special show on Rajya Sabha television, wherein we bring you all the details with respect to India's fight against COVID-19, technological interventions, drug development, vaccine development, and how health workers and everybody who is involved as the frontline workers on this fight against COVID-19 are doing their bit. So today we're going to talk about a very important aspect of this particular war, the fight against COVID-19, and that is the vaccine development. Now, this is a very important aspect and a complicated one as well, because it is time-taking, and the researchers, scientists across the world are working on certain vaccine candidates to try and find the right one, and the results will be known to us sooner or later. So we have three important guests with us today to talk about what kind of vaccine candidates are being worked upon, what are possibilities, probabilities out there, what is it that we can expect, and in how much time. Let me first introduce the guest to you, beginning with Dr. Shahid Jameel. He's a well-known virologist and the CEO of Wellcome Trust and DBT India Alliance. Also, we have with us Mr. Prasad. He's the president of quality operations of Bharat Biotech, a company which is involved in development of vaccines along with the DBT, that's Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. We also have with us Dr. Sreekumar. He's scientist with the Rajiv Gandhi Center for Biotechnology in Thiruvananthapuram. Welcome all of you gentlemen to Rajya Sabha TV studios, and thank you for taking out this important time. Let me begin with you, Dr. Jameel, and let's try and understand as far as vaccine development for COVID-19 is concerned. How far have we come? What are the different kind of threads which researchers or scientists, not only in India but across the globe, are working on?
Thank you for having me on the show. Vaccines, as you know, are substances which, when injected into the body, train the body to fight an infection in the future. COVID-19 has been a very challenging time, but it's also been a great opportunity because this is defining how vaccines will be developed in future. If you see normally how vaccines are developed, it used to take a couple of years, 4, 5, 7 years to develop a vaccine and to bring it to the market. In the case of COVID-19, the first vaccine went into human trials 63 days from the time the sequence of the virus was identified. 63 days, that's 2 months. That is phenomenal. And that really reveals the power of technology that we have today, which is also the greatest hope that we have today for fighting infections like this. Now, what are the kinds of vaccines that one can develop? Traditionally, there have been 3 kinds of vaccines. The live attenuated vaccines, meaning that you take the pathogen that is causing the disease, by some means you make it weaker, and then you inject it so that it infects, but it does not produce disease. And an example of this is the oral polio vaccine that is widely used in pulse polio programs. The second type of vaccine is a killed vaccine. A killed vaccine is you grow large amounts of the pathogen, you inactivate or you kill it with a chemical, and then you use it to inject it into a person. And again, an example of this is the injectable polio vaccine, which is now being used to mop up the few polio cases. And with the advent of recombinant DNA technology, a third kind of vaccine became available, which is called a subunit vaccine. A subunit vaccine means you take a small part of the virus, you produce that protein somehow outside the system, and use the purified protein to raise an immune response. And an example of that is the hepatitis B vaccine, which was the first recombinant vaccine to be produced. So here are 3 classic examples of how vaccines are produced. But now you have many other platforms through which vaccines are being made. So, for example, a live attenuated vaccine can be made using a technology which is called a codon de-optimization technology, which is a genetic means of weakening the virus so that the virus doesn't replicate to high numbers, doesn't cause disease, but still raises an immune response.
Okay.
One can use vectored vaccines, so use a platform. And I believe Mr. Sreekumar will probably talk about the flu mist vaccine that his company is developing, which would be a vectored vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
The vaccine which has made a lot of news in the last few days, which is the Chimp adenovirus vaccine or the Oxford vaccine, uses a cold virus, an adenovirus, derived from chimpanzees. And this is used to produce the spike protein of the COVID virus to raise an immune response.
Okay.
So at this time, just within a few months of the virus being identified, we have 115 vaccines in the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
This is phenomenal. This has never happened in the history of vaccines. So that's a great opportunity for us at this time.
Okay.
I'll stop here and answer any further questions.
Okay, we'll come to the other aspects as well, as to how much time it might take or where we might be. But let me first bring in Dr. Sreekumar here on this aspect only. Dr. Sreekumar, as Dr. Jameel is pointing out, 115 vaccine candidates so far, and that too within just a few months when the virus was first discovered. So quite a great opportunity. That's one, obviously. But from here onwards, what's the road ahead in terms of how do we zero in on the candidate, the vaccine?
See, for a vaccine, what we need is the protection against the disease. So many vaccines that we produce will be immunogenic, but are they making the protective immune response? That is the most challenging aspect. So once we have the candidate vaccine in our hand, the immediate requirement would be an animal model wherein we can use it for either a challenge study or a protection study, or maybe an immune response study for an in vitro neutralization kind of experiments. So that will be a very important priority for us to have this kind of models, animal models developed for evaluating these vaccines. So, I think in India, we are still in the very beginning of having these kind of models, but there have been a lot of initiatives from the Department of Biotechnology to have these models in place so that when these vaccines are ready, we can readily test it. So that will be a requirement for before we go into a human trial.
Okay. Okay. Let's take them one by one now, and let me bring in Mr. Sai Prasad from Bharat Biotech. He's the president of quality operations out there. And as Dr. Jameel was pointing out, yours is an vectored vaccine candidate which your company is working on. So how far have we reached as far as that particular candidate is concerned, and what is the development there?
Yeah, I thank Rajya Sabha TV for giving us this opportunity to present our products and product development in COVID. Yes, we are working on a vector vaccine. We call it the Coro Flu. What we have done is that we have taken influenza virus as a backbone, and we've inserted certain elements of COVID-19 into that virus, and we are able to mass produce it in a cell culture, what we call as vero cells. And that work is currently ongoing in the US, and we are testing it in animals in the US. And once that animal testing is completed in the US, then we bring it back here for mass production in our facility. But along with that vaccine, we are also working on 2 or 3 other broad technologies. One is looking at our existing portfolio of vaccines and looking to see if any of these vaccines can provide what we call as innate immunity for this virus. I mean, if it can protect even for a few months when at the peak of a pandemic, then we will be helped to flatten the curve. That is one concept. And a second concept we're also working on is to develop a vaccine using our traditional whole viron inactivated process technologies. We already make several vaccines like rabies, like chikungunya, Zika, injectable polio, rotavirus, using that ViroCell platform. So we are now partnering with the ICMR and the National Institute of Virology. And we will be working on developing this inactivated whole virion vaccine as an early step, because 95% of this platform is already established for us, because it's the same platform in all the other vaccines. It's only introduction of a new virus and inactivating it, and then it's a matter of formulating it, testing it for safety first, then we go for efficacy testing, and then we proceed. So I'll stop there and
Okay. Where are we in terms of which stage, if I may specifically ask, in terms of the vectored vaccine candidate development which your company is into?
So the vectored vaccine that we are developing, which we call as Coroflu, that's in what we call as preclinical testing. So we're testing it in animal models in the University of Wisconsin right now as we speak. And then the other vaccine that we are working on is a whole virion vaccine that is also in the preclinical stage. We are trying to scale up the manufacturing process first.
Okay. Dr. Jameel, one aspect which Mr. Prasad pointed out in terms of repurposed vaccines to boost the innate immunity, is that also an option before we zero in on a full-fledged vaccine candidate?
Well, I mean, it will boost immunity for a short time. It's not technically a vaccine, because a vaccine is very specific against a given pathogen. It's more of an immune stimulator or an immunomodulator. And I know what we're talking about is the MW strain of Mycobacterium, which is a non-specific way of boosting immunity.
Okay. So the idea here is that we have to focus on those one out of those 115 vaccine candidates which are being worked upon right now to try and find a sure shot, cure to COVID-19.
Yeah. See, traditionally, what has happened and this happened in SARS, this happened in many other infections, that by the time a vaccine comes to a stage of human testing, the outbreak is over. So how do you test it? Where do you find patients to test it? And this is something that the current scenario offers an opportunity. And that's why regulatory agencies are also giving accelerated approvals for human testing. So, for example, the paradigm has changed. Instead of going from animal studies to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, now there is parallel animal and human testing going on. For example, the Moderna vaccine, the Oxford vaccine, which has moved into humans, they have not been tested in animals at all. So there is essentially parallel testing instead of serial testing. So the whole paradigm of developing vaccines is sort of changing. And the idea is to get to a point where you can test efficacy while the outbreak is still going on, because the outbreak offers you an opportunity to do efficacy testing.
Okay. So in terms of testing guidelines or the ethical aspect of it, we understand that we are in a race against time here to try and get the vaccine in place before, as you point out, the outbreak is over and we won't have any other candidates to patients to go ahead and find out whether the vaccine works or not. But in terms of ethical aspect of it, is it okay to go ahead with or fast track this process as you're pointing out?
Well, the ethics cuts both ways. Is it ethical not to have a vaccine while, thousands of people are dying? So ethics cuts both ways. And this is something that regulators look at very carefully. And of course, no vaccine goes into humans unless it gets a regulatory approval to do so. So they are specialists and they look at these things.
Okay, so all aspects are taken care of, and as Dr. Jameel is pointing out, ethics cuts both ways. Obviously, Dr. Sreekumar, your views on these two aspects: one, the time which it takes for a vaccine to develop, and obviously we are in a race against time, so we would want the answers to come in as quick as possible. And what's the scenario as far as Indian research is concerned? Our scientists, our companies, the vaccine candidates which they are working on, where are we right now?
Actually, many other countries who had experience with the SARS, the old Hong Kong SARS, they were very fast into getting into the.
Yes.
Okay. So they had already that advantage of having every system ready to readily move into the SARS-CoV-2. But India, I think, didn't have much chance to work on this SARS corona, except I think maybe Dr. Shahid was the first one to work on the SARS during that outbreak. He had done a lot of work on that SARS coronavirus at that time. So maybe subsequently we didn't have much chance to take it forward. So practically we had to start from scratch. We had to start everything, and so that is going to take much more time compared to the West. But I think we are, as a consortium of many researchers, people are doing good, and we should be able to do it much faster than the routine way.
Okay.
So
yes,
actually, what would be essentially is to have all the assays in place and all the systems in place, so that once we have these candidates ready, it can be readily tried out in animal systems, or even parallel experiments or parallel clinical trials, as Dr. Shahid has pointed out.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Shahid, in terms of similarity or what we get to learn from the earlier outbreaks, be the SARS outbreak or the MERS outbreak, in helping us find a right vaccine for COVID-19.
Well, it's to some extent, yes, but it's also helping us understand the disease. So, for example, a lot of people are perplexed as to why two very similar viruses, the SARS-1 virus and the SARS-2 virus, are behaving so differently. SARS-1 virus, in about 8 months before the outbreak died, it caused about 8,000 infections and about roughly 800 deaths. 80,000 infections and about 8,000 deaths. SARS coronavirus 2, you see in just about 4 months, it has infected about 3 billion people around the world, caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. And now we are beginning to realize that there is one very critical difference between SARS-1 and SARS-2, and that is that while SARS-1, the virus shedding was happening only during the symptomatic phase when people were showing symptoms, SARS-2 is shedding even before symptoms appear. So you and I may be carrying the virus without knowing that we have the virus, and we may be shedding.
Okay, so the asymptomatic patients, you're saying?
Yeah, so it is shedding far faster in the population. As far as vaccines go, I think it's very important for platforms to be developed and be available. And that's where I think companies in India have a real advantage. Companies like Bharat Biotech have platforms ready. They had a flu platform ready, and they stitched the COVID into that platform. Similarly, Serum Institute had a platform ready. They are going with it. So I think it's very important for platforms to be available. The second point is that, you need to develop the whole pipeline and the capacity in the country at a time when outbreaks are not happening. Vaccines are not developed using 3-year grants from DBT or CSIR or DST. It's a long-term game, and we have to understand that and invest properly in it.
Okay, and since you're a pioneer in this particular field, for our viewers' benefit, if you want to look at although hazarding a guess won't be a good option out here, but how long before we might find a vaccine candidate out of these 115 in India and at a global level as well?
Well, the fastest that I have seen is the claim of the Oxford group that if the current trial works, they will have a vaccine ready in 6 months' time. And this is something that Serum Institute, with which they are partnering, is already gearing up to manufacture the vaccine, assuming that it will work.
Okay.
So this also brings in issues of funding. For example, which company would like to invest millions of dollars, crores of rupees into something that eventually may not work? So this is a gamble. And I think that is where systems have to be in place to support these. And a system such as that has become available now, something called CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Through Innovations, which is funding the development of vaccines that are not so profitable for big pharma to make. And that's where companies like Bharat, Serum, they come into play in a very big way.
Okay, so definitely it is a gamble, it is a race against time as well, and no fixed timeline can be pointed out. But yes, every vaccine candidate will have a particular. Let me bring in, Mr. Sai Prasad here. Mr. Prasad, the vaccine candidate, the vectored vaccine which your company is working on, in terms of timeline, if we look at the way Dr. Jameel pointed out, the Oxford vaccine along with Serum Institute might take around 6 months or so. So. What can be said about the one being developed by your company?
Sure. So, we are looking at, one is the vectored vaccine and one is the whole virion vaccine. For the vectored vaccine, we are, gearing up all the background work right now with the assays, with the cell lines, with the manufacturing schemes, with the scale-up technology. So we're waiting for the test results from our animal testing experiments to happen. Once that is clear, then we can immediately start into what we call as a mass production mode, very similar to what other company has announced, where we will be producing it at a large scale, and then we can test part of that vaccine in animal testing and preclinical testing, and then we will move on to phase 1 clinical trials. And we are expecting that to happen in the next 3 months for the vector vaccine.
Okay.
And for the whole virion vaccine, we are working on the manufacturing scale up right now. We're expecting to go into animal testing maybe in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And once that is done, once we establish safety, we need some additional time in animal testing, and then we could potentially go for clinical trials for that, because it's a whole virion vaccine. It's completely killed. It'll relatively be safe. In a good probability that it will protect against the current pandemic outbreak.
Okay, so there it is, quite a positive scenario as far as Bharat Biotech's development of vaccine candidates are concerned, both types there. Dr. Sreekumar, concluding words from you in terms of what we might expect and the timelines which we have been talking about. Obviously, timeline is an important question here from the general public's point of view. From researchers, from scientists' point of view, for you guys, you would understand that it is a complex process. It will take time. But the timeline, it does, become a very important question for the general public.
See, I would say it will take at least an year for us to say something about the vaccine, because at whatever speed we move, I will stick to that. That it will take at least an year for us to say something.
Okay, so it might take that longer a period. Dr. Jameel, concluding comments from you in terms of the overall vaccine development scenario for COVID-19. You started by saying that this is a good opportunity for generic vaccine development industry as well, because this gives us a lot of things to learn.
Definitely. This is an unprecedented time when things have moved at a very, very rapid pace. There is hope. And we must never lose hope. But to not protect ourselves today and wait for a vaccine to protect us would be foolish. So all the things that the government is advising us to do, we must be doing. A vaccine will be there. Whether it will be there in 6 months' time or a year's time or 2 years' time, a vaccine will be there. Mm-hmm. The question is, how are we going to protect us till that time? So behavior change from us is key to protection at this time.
Okay.
Don't wait for a vaccine to protect you. Protect yourself today.
Okay. Okay, those are the golden words. Dr. Jameel, thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Sai Prasad and Dr. Sreekumar there as well. So there it is. As far as vaccine development is concerned, these are the different aspects. It is a complex process. There are almost more than 100, that is 115 vaccine candidates being worked upon right now. Timelines may vary from 3 months to 6 months to 1 year, or perhaps more than that as well, depending upon several factors. But as our guests are also pointing out, the key here in this fight against COVID-19 is to protect ourselves, take protective measures, follow all the guidelines with respect to the lockdown, with respect to social distancing norms, as well as personal hygiene. Protect yourself today, and the vaccine, when it comes, might be able to give us further protection. Keep watching Rajya Sabha television and keep following all the guidelines. We'll come.